This week, a bill emerged as a priority in the Texas House aimed at addressing some of the failures from the response to the deadly school shooting in Uvalde nearly 3 years ago. The state lawmaker behind it previously served as the mayor of Uvalde when a gunman killed 19 students and 2 teachers there. This afternoon, he is here to talk through how he says his legislation, called the Uvalde Strong Act, could improve the law enforcement response to another mass shooting. Joining us now is State Representative Don McLaughlin. He's a Republican freshman lawmaker from Uvalde. Representative, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We want to get into the specifics of House Bill 33 in just a moment, but I'm curious how you wanted to come into your first session at the Texas Capitol and still focus on the Robb Elementary School shooting. Do you think there's been enough accountability?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, you've still got DPS. We're fixing to be our 3-year mark, and we still don't have a report out yet because the district attorney won't allow one to be released yet.
And so that's what really motivated you to file this legislation.
Well, this legislation, I was there that day, and what I saw that day was a lot of chaos. Nobody took a leadership role. We didn't set up a command post. I mean, in this, you've mandated most of the things in this bill now. This just codifies it where they have to work together with each other. They have to train together. They have to meet together. And I can tell you as the mayor, in August, when we went back to school after the May 24 tragedy, we had a meeting with law enforcement. We had some agencies that didn't show up. And this will eliminate that.
Yeah, I spent some time last night reading the legislation, and it took a while because it is very lengthy, and I want to mention what some of the language includes. As you mentioned just a few moments ago, there's some language about holding yearly active shooter trainings for law enforcement and providing grants to be able to help them to do that. There's also a requirement for annual meetings to happen between law enforcement and school districts for planning purposes in the event of an emergency. We cannot get into all the changes proposed here because it is a vast piece of legislation, but what would you say are the most significant parts that should pass out of this?
Well, the most significant parts is, number one, that they communicate and they have meetings jointly, every agency that's there. School police, sheriff, DPS. They're going to be the first ones on the scene, so they need to be on the same page. And this deal makes them all adopt a uniform active shooter response plan. Not each agency having their own do it. This is a uniform one that they all know to follow.
And what about that piece about creating a mutual aid agreement with DPS for every law enforcement agency?
Well, I think we should have that. I mean, DPS is they're in every county we have in just about every city. So why not have that? Because I mean, they're law enforcement. They're more senior to the local law enforcement and train more than we are.
Sure. And when I was looking at the legislation, I did notice that it didn't have any kind of changes proposed for gun laws here in Texas. That seems to go against what many of the victims' families would like to see happen. For instance, raising the age to buy a gun like an AR-15 to 21. What would you say to someone who may ask why that's not part of this legislation?
Well, I mean, that's a whole different topic than this. This is just making sure that our law enforcement partners have that resources they need to train. Look, I can tell you after the Robb school shooting, we had 2 shootings in Uvalde after that. Both of those were done with guns that were bought off the street illegally. So, I mean, the guns is something that we'll have to come back to, but first we need to make sure that our law enforcement is prepared for this, they're organized for it, and we don't have a repeat of what we did that day of a lot of standing around and no action being taken.
And as you were putting this legislation together, did you consult with the victims' families or other first responders there in the community? And how did that meeting go if it did indeed happen?
I did not. I mean, I've talked to some of the family. My heart breaks for them to this day still. Yeah. And I talk to them from time to time. I did not on this legislation. What we did was basically, if you look, there's been 4 reports done. You had Chairman Burrows, or Speaker Burrows' report, because he did the House investigation. Then you had the federal government did a report, then Border Patrol did a report, and the city of Uvalde did a report. And quite honestly, the very first report, the one that was done by the legislature, gave more information. But if you looked at all the reports, you will find every one of them mentions the same failures over and over and over. So what we did, we took those and said, these are what we need to change, this is what needs to be done, and this way these officers have something to follow. And you can't be saying, well, I didn't know, or I didn't do this. You do know, because you've been told, you've been trained, and you've worked together now.
Yeah, there's a piece in there about creating a guide for everyone to follow.
Yes.
This bill could come up for debate in the next week or possibly two, so we'll keep following this. But State Representative Don McLaughlin, thank you so much for joining us and for talking more about this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate you taking the interest in it.
Yeah, very much appreciate that too.